This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Grand Canyon University makes earning your degree possible with over 130 academic programs for traditional campus students, with more than 80 bachelor's programs offered online. GCU provides you with the personal support you need, from complimentary unofficial transcript evaluations within 24 business hours to scholarships, academic support, and your GCU graduation team, led by your own university counselor. Find your purpose at GCU. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
Welcome back, everyone, to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Tony Black, and today we're taking a little bit of a swerve away from the X-Files, but not away from the X-Files, I guess, in some sense. Following on from last week's irresistible episode and the terrifying Donny Faster. I don't know why I sounded northern then when I said faster. Donny
Faster.
Sounds
like a NASCAR, like a French NASCAR racer. It's Faster.
Donny Faster. He is
much creepier than this introduction makes him seem.
Yeah, he is, definitely. But off the back of Donny Faster, let's say it properly, I thought we'd do an episode. And this is the first one of a series of episodes where we've put the spotlight on the writer and the main driving creative force behind that particular X-File. In this case, obviously, Chris Carter, the best place to start, the creator of the X-Files. And we'll talk a bit later about the ultimate plan for what I'm calling the spotlight episodes. But in this one, for the first Chris Carter one, we're going to be talking about his most recent non-X-Files project, The After. And joining me for this special little episode, back again after some extremely successful previous runs on the X-Cast, it's Darren Mooney.
Yay! Hello! I've been informed that there will be no quiz at the end of this episode, so I'm much happier now.
That was my carrot on the stick to come back. Please come back, Darren. I won't test your knowledge.
Yeah, undisputed champion. Fluke. But no, it's a pleasure to be back. Actually, I have to admit, when we talked about One Breath, actually, it's one of the best conversations I think I've had about the X-Files. Actually, so I'm very pleased to be back.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say.
Although I suspect the After may be a slightly different experience for both of us.
Well, yeah.
Without getting too much into it.
No, not yet. I mean, it's no One Breath.
It's no One Breath.
Let's put it that way. Well, One Breath is, to date, our most successful episode of the X-Cast in terms of viewership and in terms of, I think critical buzz. I think most people would point to that as our best podcast yet. So it's my pleasure to have you back, Darren. It's great to have you back on the show to do this first spotlight episode.
I'm really glad that I just sat there refreshing the podcast over and over again.
Your scheme worked.
My
very
scheme
good.
worked perfectly.
Very cunning. Let's therefore launch right into the meat of the episode. And today we're going to be talking about Chris Carter's The After. The After was an American science fiction drama pilot created by Chris Carter for Amazon Studios. Alongside Bosch, the premiere episode was one of two drama pilots Amazon released online in February 2014. Viewers were allowed to offer their opinions about the pilot before the studio decided whether or not to place a series order. The pilot was ordered in August 2013 and made available for free online viewing beginning on February the 6th, 2014. On March the 12th, Amazon ordered The After to series. The first season would have consisted of 8 episodes, released in 4 two-hour instalments. However, on January the 5th, 2015, Amazon cancelled the show without shooting another episode beyond the pilot, which we are here to discuss today. And the story of The After is, I mean, it's an interesting one to try and describe, isn't it, Darren, really? I suppose the best description of it would be an ensemble mystery,
ensemble apocalyptic mystery box, like cataclysmic, demonic, social commentary with explosions and helicopters, where where most of the cast spend half the episode in a car park.
Yeah. yeah.
It's a show that sort of defies explanation in a way that's interesting. Like I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be entirely upfront. I'm not the biggest fan of The After, but for all that, it is a delightfully odd piece of television. Like it is genuinely, and it's at the stage. I think it's at late stage Carter, where he's very clear. Like he's proven that he can do standard network television drama. Like The X-Files was a cultural phenomenon. So now he has the freedom to go and do whatever the hell he wants to do. And it turns out that what he wants to do is like an apocalyptic demonic drama where the cast spent half the episode trapped in a car park. And you're like, you've got to admire the ambition of that, even if you don't, even if the execution has its flaws, if we're going to be entirely honest about it, I think.
I mean, if you look at Chris Carter's, film TVography, as it were, he hasn't really done anything before The After that wasn't based in the world of the X-Files at all. I mean, he went a long time where he was involved in trying to develop a film called Fence Walker for years, which has still not been released. He was developing a project called Unique, which would have been a police thriller television series, but that was dropped before it was completed. So there were lots of false starts on things between the end of the X-Files. Obviously, there was I Want to Believe in the middle of that, but then The After. So he went a long time, didn't he, before
doing anything. Well, I mean, obviously he did I Want to Believe after the X-Files, but I think like there's a wonderful interview with Dean Haglund, who basically said that like after the 9th season the X-Files wrapped, right? And this is, keep in mind now, Carter had not only overseen like 9 seasons of television, which took 10 years of his life, he'd also during that time he'd overseen 3 seasons of Millennium. He'd sort of seen one half season of Harsh Realm, which was horribly traumatic for everybody involved, and he'd been a supervising producer on The Lone Gunman. So he had in effect produced like close to 14 seasons of television and a feature film in the space of 9 seasons. So I can understand when Dean Haglund talks about Carter sort of wanting to drop off the face of the earth and go climb mountains for half a decade, if not, after doing the X-Files. It is very strange that he sort of returned when he did. Because, I mean, he returned with I Want to Believe in 2008, which is its own thing that I assume you'll talk about in great depth when you get to it. But then after that, it's very weird that this is like the first post X-Files project that he did, and it's a total of it's 6 years after I Want to Believe, it's 12 years after The Truth. Okay, well it's not 12 in production, it's 11 in production, but it's still a very long time, and it's very strange that like this is what drew him to it. And like you say that I was actually, when you said it's not connected to the world of the X-Files, I'm not entirely convinced of that. I think there's a very reasonable argument to be made, and I'm going to be honest. I'm surprised that if there aren't fan theories out there already hypothesizing about this, that the climax of that the episode unfolds in the wake of the climax of My Struggle 2 or something crazy like that.
Well, I thought maybe the end of this is what happens when Millennium finishes. The idea of Millennium, that Legion and whatever happens, that Frank Black was trying to stop, that this is the next step.
Yeah, that sort of story. Well, it is like, I mean, and without even sort of talking about like links in terms of character, like the iconography is very similar. So, for example, we're not talking about this in linear order, and we're assuming that you've seen the episode. So, at the end of the episode, there's a literal demon man who is covered in tattoos. First of all, he looks a lot like, say, the demons who appear in like the pilot to Millennium and in Gehenna, which are the first 2 Chris Carter episodes, and sort of recur throughout the show. But he also has a tattoo on him that looks very much, it's not a literal Ouroboros, in that, because it's not a snake eating its own tail, but it's a snake in a circle with its tail coiled around its mouth that very much feels like it's an attempt to evoke that imagery from Millennium and stuff like that.
I immediately said, and I was watching it with my girlfriend at the time, I went, Ouroboros! And she went, "Is that what?" She's not seen all this stuff yet. She went, "What?" I went, It's Millennium.
That's exactly what it is. But I mean, there's like a body, like even the demon's body is covered in like parchment and stuff like that, which feels very much like the kind of thing that you would see. Actually, to be honest, when the camera pans across the demon's body, it reminded me of the opening credits to Millennium. And I feel really odd because we're talking about how it relates to Chris Carter's work, but we're talking more about Millennium, the X-Files. But even stuff like even the opening scene, like not even the opening scene, the opening cut of the episode, which is this quick cut of like I think it's meant to be G's nightmares, is that it's these bodies pressing against glasses, it's people on bridges, which is a shot that Carter's very fond of. So like for example, from The Red and the Black or Patient X, or from obviously My Struggle 2 is a great scene. But Carter's very fond of this image of people on bridges when horrible things happen to them. And I think that there are obvious sort of metaphorical implications about being sort of in transit or over water or crossing between realms or whatever. But there's the way that it's cut and edited reminded me a lot of those flashes. Now, nowadays audiences see them and they think, oh my God, it's CSI. But back when Carter was doing television, when he did Millennium, those were genuinely like shocking pieces of television. Just these quick cuts of horrific images that sort of flash in front of you.
That was hugely Millennium. That was that. Yeah. As soon as that hit at the very beginning, I was like, yeah, you can tell this is the same guy,
and you can tell that this is sort of his pet interest as well. I mean, and even like one of the images is like people in a black space appearing to be pushed up against glass by one another, which is it's one of Carter's pet themes about like overpopulation, the environment and stuff. Because that comes back then in obviously in My Struggle 2, where the cigarette smoking man is talking about, you know, for example, overpopulation, needing to control the population in order to protect the planet and all this sort of stuff. So you can see that like Carter's interests tend to stay the same. They just play through in different ways. I mean, even the closing, the very final shot of the episode, which is the 8 strangers and the camera pulling up into the forest. At the end of Babylon, in sort of the X-Files revival series, he goes even further. He has the camera pull up over Mulder and Scully in the field, and then pull up even further to like the Earth orbiting in the sky as the sound of trumpets play. You know, like Carter's work, even if it's not connected like in a literal way, like for example, I don't think Harsh Realm has ever been literally connected to the world of the X-Files, for example, but there's always these themes and these interests and even these visuals that so that you can tell like Carter saw something and it interested him and it's going in his work. And particularly late stage Carter, who I think I don't want to sort of jump ahead of where you are in the podcast or sort of what we're talking about, but I think that late stage Carter is, I don't want to say less disciplined because that makes it sound like something bad. I think that late stage Carter is more willing to follow this imagery or more willing to just go with his feeling or his gut than early Carter, where he's much more interested in, say, structure and focus and constructing stories that make sense and work within the regular act structure or the idea of television. And there's this sort of later on, there's sort of you can see it in like the 8th and 9th seasons where he gets sort of like flexible and he gets more sort of playing and more comfortable. And it's like, okay, this image is in my head. This is what we're doing. And there was a lot of that to the after. There's a lot of the after. We talked about how random it feels. It often feels more like a collection of images than events, like because it is an apocalyptic story, and Carter is very interested in the apocalypse. Like in the X-Files, obviously it's the threat of looming colonization. That sort of hangs over the series from the end of the 3rd season. In Millennium, it's the actual literal millennium that everybody's counting down towards. In Harsh Realm, it takes place in a fictional world, in a video game world, where the apocalypse has already happened. And sort of the after is interesting in that in sort of that grand Carter oeuvre, it's the show where the apocalypse actually happens, where we get to sit through the apocalypse. I mean, actually, even My Struggle 2 is a great example. My Struggle 2 is an apocalyptic story, but it cuts out at the end with it to be continued. Whereas the after is very much like that continued. You know, it's very much like we never find out what exactly the apocalypse is because Carter apparently did learn none of his lessons from satisfying the fan base. And I like that. Like, I'm going to be honest. I am one of the few people in the world who likes mystery box shows that don't provide answers, like, say, The Leftovers. I don't think this is as good as The Leftovers, but I do feel like you're not obligated to provide those sorts of answers if that's your story. But there is this sense of like apocalypse and the end of the world that runs the episode, even though like you never get a sense of what the end of the world is. Like, characters are repeatedly going, "What's going on? What's going on?" And nobody has any clue. No. And that goes for the audience sitting at home as well. But there's just this sense of dread and this sense of like end that sort of bleeds through it. And I think that's a very sort of Carter theme that you'll see. Like you're talking about, we're jumping in after Irresistible. Like you're going to start seeing that materialize around the end of the 3rd season, I think. And it's just going to keep going from there. It's just going to keep building.
It's interesting to place this after Irresistible. It's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the after first. You know, his most recent non-X-Files thing, because there are definite connections to, obviously Apocalypse, but also to demonology. He stated that originally he wanted the show, if it had been commissioned, picked up, he wanted it to run for 99 episodes.
Over 11 years.
Oh, yeah.
Because Carter, I like that Carter's like reached the stage of his career where it's not like you don't have to pretend to be modest. It's like, I don't have a vision about getting to the end of the year. It's like, I dream in decades.
Exactly. He's at that point now. And he wanted to use the Divine Comedy, which is the epic poem by Dante, which features 99 cantos, which is obviously a long poem. So it's the word for canto is the Italian word for singing. So he wanted to take that whole Dante mythology, Dante's Inferno, the very traditional Renaissance idea of hell, and he wanted to make that into a TV show. He said that was my approach, to try and mimic the 99 cantos. It was a tough sell. It was 8 characters in hell, basically. I think that's the reason we parted ways. So
this is when Amazon sort of Amazon. I'm curious about what exactly happened. I think Amazon wanted him to do a Bible or to plan it out or something like that.
Yeah,
and I think his response was he wanted to discover what it was about while writing based from Dante, which I can imagine. Like, if I was an Amazon executive sitting in that meeting, I would be a little bit nervous. I'm going to be honest. Like, I know it's Chris Carter, and I know he delivered the X-Files, which is like one of the biggest 90s hits, and it's fantastic. It's got a following. It like shaped popular culture. But on the other hand, the guy sitting at the other end of the table is like, I don't really feel like doing a Bible. It's like, okay, have you got a plan about where you want to go? Yeah, I've been reading a lot of Dante. One of the things that interests me about this, and I know that we're obviously never going to see it, and he didn't do a Bible, so we're never going to hear what he had planned. Like, the 99 cantos of the Divine Comedy, they're 3 sections of 33. So there's the Inferno, there's Purgatory, and there's Heaven. And part of me is sort of wondering, like, in terms of storytelling, if you're doing television, like 33 episodes in hell is fairly easy because you make characters suffer. And based on what we see of the After, Carter's got a knack for that. Carter's going to keep doing that.
Oh, yeah.
But you kind of wonder what 33 episodes in Purgatory will look like. And you wonder what 33 episodes in Heaven will look like, given that like Heaven is like the end destination for most shows. But for this, it will be a full third of the run, like 3 years or sort of, 4 years of that season run.
He shot himself in the foot by going in there and saying all this to them. What he should have done was go in and go, I've got this idea. It's got demons in it. I've got like a 10, maybe 20 episode plan. Knowing he's got like the 99 episode, and they go, yeah, okay, cool, all right, yeah, we'll go with that. We'll go. But he went in there and went, right, I want 11 years. I want 40 million a season.
I want to do it in 2-hour blocks. And because if you think about the After, right, the After is a very saleable idea to a company like Amazon, because it is like, it's 2013, 2014, right? So, but it's an apocalyptic thriller. So you've got like the post 9/11 thing happening. You've got 28 Days Later. You've got Dawn of the Dead. You've got all those zombie films. You've got The Hunger Games. You've got The Maze Runner. You've got Divergent. You've got all this sort of interest in post-apocalyptic culture, and like, that should be an easy sell. And I think that going into the meeting perhaps and saying, well, look, being upfront and saying, well, look, I'm doing that a little bit, but I've also got my eye on the Divine Comedy. I think that maybe that is like, it's a boldly ambitious move, and it's something that I admire Carter for doing. But I do wonder if that was the moment where Amazon were kind of like, yeah, we think we might go with the detective thriller starring Titus Welliver.
Yeah, and presumably this was in the interim after they, thought, oh, it's Chris Carter, he's back, all this. The pilots are all right. Let's give him 8 episodes. At that point, when he probably unspooled the plan, in inverted commas, that maybe was when they went, no.
It's a very odd episode of television, the pilot. Like, it really is just structured as a piece of television, because like Carter's been away, and we were talking about how Carter's been away. And so, like, the After, it doesn't feel like a TV episode. It doesn't even feel that much like a pilot beyond, like, doing the basic stuff of laying out the premise. But in terms of, like, structure, it begins with 8 people trapped in the basement of a skyscraper. And they take, like, 20 to 30 minutes to get out of the basement of the skyscraper.
At least, yeah.
At least. And then there's like 10 minutes of really intense, apocalyptic, end-of-the-world stuff with crowds pushing, and the breakdown of society, and the breakdown of civil order, which is sort of one of Carter's themes. Like, you have the fireman who won't help, and the cop who won't help. And this is sort of like Carter's big fear, is this idea that society will collapse, which is something that again comes up in Millennium, obviously, but it comes up in the X-Files revival as well. Like Carter's big fear seems to be, like, obviously he's worried about the environment, obviously he's worried about other stuff, but his big fear is this idea that society is going to break down and civil order is going to stop making sense. And that seems to be what the after's like apocalypse is. Like the particulars of it are unclear, but like the reason that it falls apart is because like firemen stop helping and police stop caring, and all this sort of stuff seems to be the suggestion in that 10-minute block, I think. And then they go off and they get into this mansion where they spend another 20 minutes in this very closed mansion, which is like, it's an interesting structure, but it's not, if I were making a TV series about the end of the world, it is not how I would structure it, I think. And I don't know. What do you think? Like, if you were making a TV show about the end of the world, would it look like this?
I doubt it. And this is the thing. It's very much, in the last few years, you've had a lot more TV shows with big, premises in such things like, do you remember The Event?
Yes.
About like 10 years ago, like in the wake of Lost.
Yeah, that's it, or Flash Forward or whatever, or any number of those things. Alcatraz. I remember Alcatraz. Yeah. Nobody remembers Alcatraz.
Alcatraz, The Event, Flash Forward, all of which, to some extent, had similar high concept ideas, and they all didn't get past the season, basically, because they had very sort of generic approaches to them. They were. The Event was basically trying to be Lost. Flash Forward was again very
also trying to be Lost because it had even the flashes.
Yeah, exactly. Alcatraz was trying to be a weird sort of mix of Fringe and a procedural with a little bit of like Lost. It's all kinds of stuff in there. Lost again. So that was in the wake of all those. But obviously, Chris Carter isn't. It's his stuff that influenced things like Lost. So he's not really taking a cue from that. He's doing it his own way, but at the same time, it's this high concept idea done in a sort of very low key ensemble character way, and it's odd because he has this very sort of very very myriad group of people who, and actually the only truly good thing I think worked about this was the fact that I was interested in most of those characters, and I would have liked to have seen more about
a bit more of them.
By the end, I was curious, and I liked some of them, and I hated some of them, and I wanted to see more of who they were, and that is a good sign of an ensemble that in its own way is starting to work. And I think that was the one thing that he got right in this. The rest of it was very. It was like chapter 1 of a book. He was holding his cards very close to his chest. And in this day and age, perhaps too close to his chest. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think that we sort of reached the stage where we gotten past the high concept of Lost, and what we need is we need the big bang. You need the sort of you need to open strong and sort of carry on. Like, I think audiences have lost patience, perhaps, and this is something that I wonder if you would trace back to the X-Files, where audiences have sort of lost trust in this idea that questions will be answered or mysteries will be solved in a satisfying manner. And what they want is a sort of a drive to it almost. So you have stuff like say, Game of Thrones or even Westworld, where the season is structured as like a self-contained book almost. So like all the mysteries in Westworld are explained by the end of the first year, presumably so that you can have more in the second. And the same with, say, Game of Thrones, which in its first year, it throws out... I love this. I love that I'm spoiling all of modern television. The end of the first season of Game of Thrones, throws out the book and basically says, hey, look, that character you thought was the protagonist? Yeah, no. Yeah.
It was Sean Bean. He was obviously going to die. Come on, guys.
Law of averages. It really is disconcerting when you see Sean Bean and he makes it to the end of a movie.
Yeah, it's weird. Inevitably, the movie's always almost terrible. If he survives, it's a bad film. On the whole.
Yeah. But the After doesn't quite hit those levels of sort of insanity, I don't think. But it gets close enough in places. It's very weird because it's basically the 8 people are brought together by getting into a lift and sort of then going down to the car park and spending so much time in the car park. I feel like I haven't emphasized how much time they spend in the car park enough. Yeah. But they spend a lot of time in the car. And part of me wonders, is that like a cynical sort of save the budget for the 10 minutes where we go outside and it's the end of the world? Because those sequences look great. Because you've got people running, you've got helicopters flying overhead, you've got explosions, you've got vehicles, you've got windows smashing, you've got you've got guns, you've got people panicking. And so Murray sort of wonders if when you were breaking down the budget for the pilot, was it I want these 10 minutes? And it's okay, you can do that, but you're going to have to spend the rest of the movie in a car park or maybe a house. And he's okay, I can do that.
But it's true. It's true. He does focus a lot of time, and there is an element of the show in those parts going round in circles. I mean, it's like a 55-minute episode, and I don't necessarily think it needed to be. I think you could have lopped 10 minutes off that, and it would have been trimmer, and you could have got to the point faster. I mean, the first 5 minutes alone are the ostensible lead of the ensemble, the absurdly named Gigi Genro.
Because, of course, she's a Chris Carter character.
She's this extremely French, attractive actress who is...
with a gun.
Yeah, which in the end does turn out to have some semblance on the story, a little bit, but it's her day as an actress getting ready for that. And you think to yourself, well, I was 5 minutes in, I was thinking, this seems really strange. Why aren't we getting to everything faster? Why isn't... And then part of me was thinking, well, is that the point? Is he intentionally making a character drama? And it turns out he is, really. He does try and put character first. And I think, like I say, not all of them work, but some of them do, and they work well. And when you get them in those confined spaces, as the story develops and they are forced into alliances in their own way, I thought there was a fair bit of dramatic tension. I think he got that quite well, aided by some good actors like Aldous Hodge.
Yeah,
stood out obviously.
It's great. As and I feel like this name also needs some Chris Carter focus. D Love. Sounds like he should be doing late night party sets.
Yeah.
And now we've got DJ D Love.
D Love.
The really weird thing is that even the other characters refer to him as D, including the police officer as well.
Yeah.
It's like you don't want to do this D. It's like all we have on his police file is an initial and the surname Love. It doesn't matter that he's been in prison and obviously part of the system. We're not going to call him Dave. We're not going to call him Derek. It's D Love.
Well, let's talk about the characters a little bit then, because they are 8 very, very specific characters. So you've got Aldous Hodge as D Love, who is the convicted criminal who claims he's innocent. I think it was that his wife he'd murdered someone's wife, or he was accused of murdering someone's wife. And he's been in jail for years, and he proclaims his innocence. And he seems... he's very much set up in this pilot as being the anti-hero.
The moral center. Well, yeah. He keeps leaving and then keeps coming back. It's like, whenever D looks like he's abandoned it, it's like, okay, maybe there'll be 3 minutes where he won't be there.
And it's never quite clear why he keeps coming back. All the way through, Carter's at pains to write him as a character who would, happily look after his own self-interest, but then something keeps dragging him back.
But Aldous Hodge is great, to be fair. Hodge is really, really good in the role, and it's telling that he's sort of gone on to greater things. He's one of, there are a few actors in here that you recognize, and some of them you recognize from the work they did before, and some of them you recognize from the work they did afterwards. But Aldous Hodge is done sort of, he's popped up in a lot of stuff afterwards. He's one of the lead actors in WGA's Underground, which is the first sort of scripted WGA series. It's Ocean's 11, but with slaves, I believe.
Oh, wow, okay.
Which sounds like a very risky premise, but apparently they pull off very, very well.
He was also in Leverage, which I quite enjoyed. Leverage. It was a very fluffy, silly show, but it was fun. So he was in that for many years. So he's very good. He sort of holds the centre, as you say. You've got Louise Monod as Gigi, who I wasn't particularly interested. She was attractive, yeah, she was pretty on the eye, fine, but she wasn't a particularly interesting character to me. But she was supposed to be the mother, with the husband and the baby elsewhere, and she's the only one who turns around and goes, "Haven't you all got families that you are worried about?"
I didn't know that Louise was going to be a guest on this podcast. Why didn't you tell me?
Hello, Darren. Now I'm taking over from Tony. I'll stop. I've got to stop doing accents on the Xcast. Seriously.
But yeah, Gigi is very much she's the conventional Chris Carter lead in the sense of when you say conventional, you think Mulder and Scully because those are the most iconic ones. But when you look at stuff like, say, Millennium, the first season of Millennium, or you look at stuff like, say, Harsh Realm. Carter has this preference for characters who are separated from or sort of kept separate from their families and wanting to protect the family unit. And you can tell that Jason Lewis plays her husband for like a Skype or video conversation at the start of the episode. And, like, Lewis is an actor you recognize, so you sort of suspect that Carter was going to keep bringing him back in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a random appearance or a random reference. And I suspect that like that would have been how Carter would have played through his themes. Like, because we're talking about how like when you can tell society, you can tell the world's ending because cops aren't doing their job and firefighters aren't doing their jobs. Like, Carter's big interest is in reuniting or solidifying the family unit. That's sort of a big recurring theme of his work. Ironically, for shippers, that family unit doesn't seem to include Mulder and Scully. But you'll probably talk about that as the X-Files goes on. But he does have this idea of like the family as a unit that needs to be protected. And it's very clear in, say, the first season of Millennium, for example. And I kind of suspect now, as you pointed out, the pilot makes it quite clear that this is where her character is going. Don't you all have families? By the way, your Louise is much better than mine, Louise.
Thank you.
Low bar to pass, but somehow he does it. Somehow it works. But I think she's very much that character who is designed to bring the family together, or who's going to reunite with her family. And I think that's another sort of, you're looking for Carter sort of trademarks in the story. That's a very big one, I think.
That is a big one. And she ultimately, I think, would have been the one to stitch this family together, this group together. She would have played that sort of almost, leading woman, but maternal figure in a different sense. I think we definitely. Then you've got Ariel Kebbel as Tammy, who, two things struck me about her. One, she's one of the worst cops I've ever seen on television in my life, because she's hopeless. She she stands there and she's like, put that gun down, D, and he just takes it off her, and she shoots a guy for just running at her instead of like it's just
insisting that he stop.
Yeah, you're just not very good. And she reminded me, I don't know if, well, I hope for your sake you haven't, but you probably have. She reminded me of Natalie Martinez's character in Under the Dome. Who, yeah, basically.
Take that, Tammy.
Yeah, sorry, Tammy, because that really is an insult. Although, to be fair, Natalie Martinez wisely jumped ship off that show after the first season. I can't describe Under the Dome. To be fair, it would make a hilarious podcast, Under the Dome. Trust me, because it is easily the stupidest TV show I think I've ever seen in my life. But she just reminds. If anyone knows of Under the Dome, and I hope for your sake you don't. She's like that character anyway. She just struck me as quite an ineffectual, law enforcement officer.
Which is odd, because you assume that the law enforcement officer would be the leader in the group, having presumably received some training. Well, it may not have included the end of the world. You imagine crisis management will be somewhere in there.
Well, yeah. So, some kind of, if there is a massive problem, you're going to be useful and
responsible. Yes.
Yeah. Not really. So then you've got Jamie Kennedy as Dave the Clown. Jamie Kennedy's probably one of the most well-known people in this, although, I'll be honest, I didn't recognise him because he's put a little bit of timber on, hasn't he, over the years?
That's why you didn't recognise him, not the clown makeup.
No, but even when he took the clown makeup off, I was still a bit like, oh yeah.
I knew he was in it, and I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, where's Jamie Kennedy? And then he goes to the mansion, and he walks out of the darkness. And I'm like, oh, is there a ninth person joining them? Like, I see what he did there.
Yeah, that was quite a good moment, actually, because for a minute I genuinely thought there was a man in that house. And then he goes, no, it's Dave. I'm the clown.
You mean you guys didn't know my first name?
Yeah. I've been with you all this time. He was good. There were some great moments. I mean, he doesn't play a massive role in this, apart from the argument where he basically has to defend the fact he's, presumably gay, although it's a presumption made by one of the characters.
He's fairly heavily implied.
He was good. There was one moment I liked with the clown where they're trying to get the in the garage, in the parking garage, where they're trying to get the
grate up, is it?
The grate, that's it. And he turns around and he goes, I'm a clown. I can't do this. It's so funny. Because it's true. It's like, I'm not cut out for this rough and tumble stuff. I'm a clown. He's very funny. He was good, and he was understated all the way through, really.
It was, which is like Kennedy is not an actor who generally does understated in his past performances, including, say, Son of Mask. But yeah, I think he actually works surprisingly well. And David is the character I would probably have been most interested in. Apart from, I think Aldous Hodge gave a better performance, but I think David is the character who probably would have had the most potential of the ensemble.
Absolutely, I agree completely. There was an actress called Jaina Lee Ortiz as Marley Munoz, who was the
another Chris Carter name.
Oh my god, yeah, very, very Chris Carter. He likes his alliteration, doesn't he? In this show, there's quite a bit of that with these women, anyway. But she was the escort, essentially, of the lawyer played by Adrian Pasdar. Although, and she was a strange character because she's the one who first brings up quite pointedly about the Book of Revelation and makes a very clear Carter written point of saying, maybe this is all like judgment. While she's naked in the swimming pool.
While naked in the swimming pool and holding a bee. Which is, again, another Chris Carter image. Yeah. Which is like, let's just throw all the Carter image we can into this, and a naked woman. Why not?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that struck me about The After is that, like, Carter is very sort of timid when it comes to embracing the opportunities to say a streaming title as opposed to a network title. Like, all the swearing, for example, feels really tacked on.
It does. Yeah,
it really does. And like the nudity of Marley feels incredibly like excessive to the point where you could you suspect that like at some point during the process it's like, look, what is the difference between doing this for Amazon and doing this for Fox? Is, well, I can probably get away with some nudity, so I should probably do that. Where can I pop this in? The bit where she talks about the Book of Revelations.
Yeah, perfect point.
Holding a bee.
Yeah, holding a bee. And this is an indicative fact of Carter in that he has always, and increasingly as time has gone on, this is very, very clear in the revival series of The X-Files, but he's always straddled that very thin line between being quite profound and being ridiculously po-faced and absurd to the point where you can't help but laugh at what he's trying to do. When he's being serious, that moment where she's in the pool with the drunken Irishman holding a bee naked, talking about the Book of Revelation. I was in my head. I was thinking, "What the fuck is this?" I was like,
none more Carter.
Yeah. And it's usually the moments where he doesn't realise that he's actually being quite profound, that he's ended up being quite profound.
It is. It's very much like a Redux 1 moment, where it's like you're waiting for the monologue to begin as she's walking away, playing over the scene, in which sort of McCormack lays bare his sort of inner thoughts in the most purple prose imaginable.
Oh, well, since we're on the subject, McCormack, played by Andrew Howard, easily, Darren, and I would say this if I wasn't speaking to an Irishman, easily the worst character I think I've seen on television in a long, long, long time.
He's Paddy Irishman.
Oh my god!
Not only is it enough that he's a drunk. Not only is it enough that he swears like a sailor, not only is it enough that he's downright creepy and menacing, not only is it enough that he's incredibly thuggish, he's also played by a Welsh actor. And sexist and racist and homophobic. Part of me, like, when I was watching it, I kind of admired the audacity of putting a character like McCormack on screen. Because, Carter, the early seasons of The X-Files occasionally tended to be a little insensitive when it came to portraying, like, race and ethnicity and something like that. So, for example, like, the Voodoo episode, or the Native American episode, or the, like, South of the Border episode, or El Chupacabra. And he sort of, like, around about, say, the 5th or 6th season, they seemed to sort of, like, they cut that out and they began focusing on class as opposed to race. And it's really weird watching The After and seeing it sort of slip back into that pattern, where it's like, McCormack is the most obvious example, but there are other examples. Well, like David is very effeminate in the way that he's portrayed and the way that he sort of behaves. In sort of like he isn't like flaming as sort of gay stereotypes go, but you watch it after McCormack's accused him of being gay, and where he goes, "How do you know I'm gay?" And you see that there is that sort of Queenie archetype at play, and even stuff like D Love is not the most sensitive of like names or characterizations for an African American character in there, or even the bit where like after they go into the house and the maid who's left brings her family back, and she's well, first of all she's Latin American, so she's the maid, which is the first racial stereotype.
Yeah.
But apparently that's not like enough racial stereotypes for the episode. She brings like her, I don't know if they're her sons or her nephews or extended family, but they're like Mexican or Latino gangbangers. Like these are the kind of people that like when Trump talks about an immigration ban, these are the kind of people who he's talking about. It's this horrible racist stereotype. Like they have bandanas on their heads, carrying shotguns. There's elements of this that would seem outdated had it aired in like 1993. Yeah. And to sort of see it in a TV show in 2014 is very disconcerting. And like McCormick's not the worst example because he's white and Irish. And like, as far as stereotypes go, like the Irish stereotype isn't that bad. But yeah, one of the things I did appreciate about McCormick, and there's very little that I appreciate, is he's a weirdly specific Irish stereotype. Like he's very much like a working class Irish stereotype. He's like, he swears up and down. Like I've got several favorite McCormick lines, but my one of my personal favorites is the moment where like they're asking about the code that Tammy's using on the radio. And can I swear on this podcast?
I think given we've set this up, I think you're all right. Go on then.
It's fucking police, for we're fucked in the fucking asshole. It's like. And it's like, Carter, I'm not sure you could fit any more swearing in that sentence, but I do appreciate the effort. And the swearing that McCormick uses, to be fair to Carter, to be perfectly fair to Carter, it is Irish. It is like, I would hear these words not at the same concentration and not as the only thing that a person says, but you would sort of hear these things in, say, the north inner city of Dublin. It's like Jesus as a swear word, which is something I've used. Bollocks, which is the Irish swear word that Miles O'Brien got to use on Star Trek. A lot of bloodies. And you've got, I'm not a beaten spastic, which is horribly offensive to anybody who knows what it actually means. But you get the sense that like Carter maybe got away with it because it's very vernacular, sort of Irish, or maybe like I think maybe some of it's British as well. Like I think if I were to say I'm not beaten spastic, you'd understand what that meant. Or if I said bollocks, you'd know what that meant or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a very precise racial caricature, which I kind of admire on some level. It's like it's not like he's going, oh, begosh and begara, what have we got going on here now?
It did feel like only one step away from that, though, in many respects. You know, it felt like he'd been written by Alan Partridge, you know, or he'd been plucked out of a very bad 1970s sitcom. Like, made by ITV.
Or like a League of Gentlemen character, sort of. Almost,
maybe.
You get the sense that, like, spoofing this racial caricature would be the main purpose of having McCormick in anything. Yeah. When the Latino gangbangers, who, again, I feel the need to emphasize, this episode has Latino gangbangers in it, attack the house. Like, McCormick is slowed down because he's running with a box of alcohol.
Forgotten that. Yeah, and he doesn't even run back to pick up the wine that he's dropped.
He does, yeah.
And you've got all these hunch going, come on, man, come on. And he's like, I'll get my fucking wine.
Like, you're one step away. And he's constantly drinking. He's constantly got a can in his hand. And it's very odd because, like, the mansion they go to, I'm not entirely convinced that woman that is it Frances? Frances. Yeah, that Frances has cans of beer or cider in her fridge. Yeah. But somehow, McCormick always has one in his hand. And I know that like, McCormick is not the worst racial stereotype in the episode, but just because he's the one that jumps out to me as an Irish person, that was striking. That was sort of like a moment where I was like, when I was watching this, part of me sort of wondered how much Carter had, when Carter left the X-Files at the end of the 9th season, and he went away and he climbed mountains, which is justifiable. Like, you've done 14 seasons of television. You deserve a break. You should, like, never have to work in television again. It should be like going back to Vietnam. Like, when Fox wants you, they should have to, like, go out to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and you should be able to say, I lost too many good men to go back in there. There is a point where I wonder, like, Carter, as a writer, hasn't necessarily evolved, like, a great deal since. And I mean, like, because this is one of the things I love Carter. I think Carter is he's a really good writer. He's a better writer than he gets credit for, and I think he's a fantastic director. Like, I think he's in the top 5 directors working on the X-Files, which is a great list to be in. And there are some nice little moments in like the after in terms of direction. So like there's the rich use of red, which is sort of a recurring Carter motif. The red and the black, obviously, like the checkers and Improbable. But here it's like the red suitcases and it's the red layout and stuff like that. That sort of like evokes hell. And there's the bee as well. And there's that wonderful shot as Gigi's running back to the hotel to try and get a phone. Where she's sort of framed between these sort of lines going down the side of the building, as if she's sort of boxed off and caged, and she's still trapped even after she got out of the basement. I think there's some nice touches like that, but there's a lot of the direction in the after that feels like late 90s television as opposed to 2010s television. So like there's not a lot of sort of sweeping long takes, for example. There's moments when cuts that aren't really necessary. For example, when D-Love knocks down the gate to the house and he pulls the car down, he gets out and he stares at the house and does like a double take of whoa. The camera doesn't like circle around him to get a sense of what he's looking at. The camera like switches from one fixed position to the next, which is it's a very rigid old school television setup as opposed to like the more cinematic style that we're used to now. And like I think maybe the racial characters were a little bit of that. It's a little bit like Carter is still sort of in a 90s mode when he's writing. When you've done what Carter's done, like you're perfectly entitled to do that. Like I somehow I suspect Carter's not going, well look, I'm getting notes from this podcast saying I really need to keep modern and hip, because the work that he's done deserves recognition, and like he invented that style of late 90s television. And so it seems a bit churlish for me to go, well, look, maybe he's having a bit of difficulty adapting to a more modern television landscape, which I think we see with the miniseries as well. But I do think that's true.
I was about to say that because it's something, it was a big charge leveled at him as to why season 10 was bad. And I mean, I am firmly one of the people who, Babylon aside, which I
like that. You need to talk about. I don't hate it. I don't hate I don't hate the 6 episodes. I understand. Yeah, I don't think they're the best that he's done, but I do think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I think there's one genuine classic. I think there's at least another very good episode, and one episode that is like an edit away from a masterpiece.
Yeah, and this is the thing. The same charge was leveled that he's not changed the way he does things, and one of my big comebacks with this, and I will continue saying this throughout the X-Cast, is you wouldn't have been happy if he had changed the X-Files. People wanted that show back, and he gave you the show that you remember. He tweaked certain bits of it, but he didn't update it for a modern audience. He brought the same show back. And that could be the fact that he has been away a long time. He hasn't evolved in the same sense, but then maybe it's the fact that we've forgotten what he is. As in, like you said, he created this kind of style back then. You don't look at someone who creates a style and say, why haven't you changed? Everyone else has evolved beyond, not necessarily beyond him in terms of being better, but all of his writers, Vince Gilligan, Howard Gordon, all these people who've gone on to create these amazing shows that are loved by everybody. They took the ball and they ran with it and they created their own style.
But they built from his foundation.
Well, exactly. And he doesn't have to be the same. He doesn't have to do the same thing. His style was what they jumped off from. Yeah. And The After is a good example of that. It is a modern day show with his very 90s stylistics, which is unusual. And that's why I think Amazon balked at it, and it's why viewers maybe didn't get it. Although I genuinely think this would have ended up a cult hit.
I suspect it would have ended up a cult hit as well. I'm going to be honest, I didn't get it either, but that's part of the appeal of it, I think. It's meant to be this weird, odd thing. And I think it succeeds on those terms. Although, there is a lot that I would tweak about it. I would steer away from the racial caricatures, for example. But I do think that, it is vintage. It is vintage Carter. And it's got that, as you said, the ensemble is good. But it's also got this sort of sense of eerie mystery, which you don't get in, when you're talking about the knockoffs, like say, Flash Forward or The Event. They don't set up the eeriness or the discomfort in the same way that The After does.
It does have an atmosphere to it. It does have that level of enigma. And, there's some really good things that he lays out there. There's obviously the constant, images and motifs about 666 and about demonology and about the end, the literal apocalyptic biblical sense. But there's also the big mystery, which I was very curious about, the fact they all have the same birthday.
The 7th of March.
The 7th of March. That was a really interesting moment where they all go, oh, your birthday's 7th of March? So's mine. Well, hey, when's your birthday? 7th of March.
To be fair... we don't know that McCormick's birthday is the 7th of March, because when he's asked, he responds with "fuck off." It's entirely possible McCormick sort of breaks the pattern.
Yeah, possibly. That could have been a reveal to come. It's used as the leaping off point in order to have a big argument and a fight and everything like that. And it's
a nice eerie detail.
Yeah. But yeah, it is. And it's a detail with no context. You have no idea why all those people with the same birthday ended up in the same place at the same time.
It is, because it's not even like if it were 10:13, you just go, oh, that's Carter being Carter. But like I looked up, because I'm super nerdy about this, I looked up like the 7th of March and I could not find anything that jumped out at me sort of special about that date. That sort of would make me go, well, it's the Feast of X, or it's Celebration Y, or it's it's mentioned in the Book of Revelations. It's like, turns out the date is down there in the bottom. But it does sort of, it creates that sort of nice sense of mystery that I think the X-Files sort of had. Where it's like when you're peeling back the layers of the conspiracy, and there's always a sense that the's something more at play. I think Millennium has that as well when it comes to the demonology. Yeah. Although it's more abstract in its sort of mythology than the X-Files. And I would have been curious to see, like, first of all, I would have been curious to see if Carter was interested in resolving this stuff. Because part of me sort of suspects Carter was very interested in throwing these questions out there and just making it odd. I don't want to say for the sake of being odd, because that sounds condescending, but making it odd as an atmospheric choice. Like making it odd because that oddness enriches the story, as opposed to setting up mysteries to answer, which I like, and I think a lot of viewers are less keen on than I am, to be honest. But I like an oddness, and I think The After is odd.
It is odd. It is weird. It's weird in an atmospheric sense. It's weird in the sense of how it's portrayed and how it's set up. It doesn't want you to completely feel comfortable in its skin, and that's the point, and that's why at the very end, when you see the demon, or as the Dark Shadow, as it's called in the credits, it's this really very sort of The Thing, sort of twisted exorcism,
crawling like Spider-Man.
Yeah. You see this thing, this demon thing in its full glory. It's that whole keeping the monster, just out of the eye line. This doesn't. This shows you the monster, or a monster, to the point where it's a big revelation for these people to go, what the fuck is going on?
As if this wasn't weird enough.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, shit. There is really something supernatural and strange and weird. And that's the big bombshell at the end that is going to propel the season and the whole series forward. But it's that whole idea of what he's establishing here is something that is intentionally odd and strange. The big question I've got, and the question I think we'll end on here, talking about The After, is had this happened, had this actually gone on, Darren, what do you think he wanted to truly explore out of this and get out of this? Like you said, he wanted to throw a lot of questions out there, and you're probably right in that he didn't have the answers, essentially, because Chris Carter's never been interested in answers. And
I don't think that's invalid, to be fair.
No, me neither. And it's one of the things I love about his work, in that, I love the fact we never quite know what the truth is. And and that's a big plus point for me, and it drives a lot of people mad. What do you think he would have wanted this to be and to explore?
To be honest, I suspect, like, in the broadest possible terms, it would have been a family reunion story. It would have been Gigi trekking across the country to reunite with her family, and to discover that, like, the natural order of things is the family unit protected from the chaos on the outside. Sort of like, say, the Black family in Millennium, or sort of like the two leads in Harsh Realm, who are separated literally by a world trying to get back together. And I suspect, like, Carter is, like, when you say conservative, it's conservative with a small c. In that, like, Carter is obviously, he's a surfer from Los Angeles. From California. There's sort of a limit to or from Bellflower, Oregon. But there's a limit to how sort of conservative you can be. But he does seem to genuinely believe that the family unit is something that needs to be protected, and that, like, when you're in a family, you are safe from a hostile world. And I suspect that's probably what you would have seen play out across The After. You would have seen Gigi trying to get back to her family and trying to sort of reconstruct the family. And even as you pointed out, try and build a family unit out of these 8 sort of disparate strangers along the way, discovering, like, this post-apocalyptic hellish landscape that unfortunately may have been populated by Latino gangbangers, which, I hope we would have seen less of as the series went on.
You'd think.
This sort of breakdown of social order, like the idea, this sort of collapse of society, but somehow, and it's a weird image to come back to, because it's actually not an image from Carter, it's an image from Morgan and Wong, but it's the image of the end of the second season of Millennium, where Frank Black and his family are waiting in the cabin at the end of the woods. And, like, there was a lot of the second season of Millennium in the 10th season of The X-Files. And part of me sort of wonders if that carried over from The After. Like, if you would have seen as The After played out, like Gigi with her family in a cabin in the middle of the woods, like as the world falls apart around her. I don't know, but that's just a crazy guess. There's no way to know. It could just be aliens.
Yeah, they're demon aliens. That's the big reveal. That's when it would have ended up being like another spin-off of the X-Files, and that would have been the big revelation that it ties to My Struggle. It's set after My Struggle 2, and they were demon aliens all along. There you go.
Well, I mean, this is what you're talking about. Like, you're talking. People are complaining that, like, My Struggle 2, with the complex negotiations going on about the 11th season, that it won't get a satisfactory resolution. I say, hey, look, The After. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Let's just make The After. To be fair, the chief of Amazon at the time, Roy Price, said that not everything works out. It wasn't the money. It was a tough concept and hard to crack. He said, who knows? Maybe it'll come together one day. So you never know. Maybe it'll come together as a comic or something like that. You know, in the grand tradition
in the side like Millennium or whatever. Yeah, and
you know, maybe Carter will get a chance, or in novels. You know, maybe he'll get a chance to tell this story in a different way. So
he has always wanted to write novels. I believe he has wanted to write a novel at some point. I believe. So
this is his perfect chance, really, to write the follow up to this, or to incorporate this into a book and then tell a series of novels. You know, it's an interesting enough story, and much as it's a flawed piece of work. And it's not a great pilot, certainly not as great as the X-Files or Millennium were.
Or even Harsh Realm, or even the Lone Gunman. It's very much the bottom tier of, like, Chris Carter associated pilots, actually.
Yeah. And it's not as good as his earlier work. It is interesting.
No.
And it is a shame that he never got to at least explore it in one season and do some sort of, you know, even if it was a mini-series, to explore these ideas.
Well, I mean, you mentioned this earlier, actually, and I think it's worth mentioning in terms of that argument that Carter didn't evolve with television, is that you mentioned the plan that he wanted to do 8 episodes released in 4 2-hour blocks, which is interesting because when he's releasing on a streaming service, like, the pattern is you release all episodes all at once. So I wonder if that was sort of an example of Carter being uncomfortable with, like, the Amazon model, or sort of being an awkward fit. Was like, you know, because Amazon, I imagine, would have been just release all 8 episodes all at once and let people binge it. And Carter would have been, no, you keep a weekly, you keep at least some semblance of a weekly model here. And I do sort of wonder where those 4 mini movies would have gone, basically.
It could
would have been interesting. Yeah,
certainly at that time as well. I mean, they're getting the streaming services are getting a little bit better at the whole 1 episode a week idea. You know, they are getting a little bit better at that. But sometimes they will drop it and you can binge it, like the Netflix, you know, Defenders Marvelverse. But then some, like, you know, they are starting to get into this pattern. So, but I think when this would have come out, it would have been very much, you need to drop all 8 at once. So I think you're right there. He may not have. It may not have been a good fit for him, and that's probably one of the reasons it didn't happen. It just didn't all quite fit. And, you know, and the other side of it is we probably wouldn't have got season 10 of the X-Files had he got that order. And he would have been doing the After now. So, you know, we might not even be sitting here talking about it. Do you know what I mean?
We'd be talking about that cult masterpiece, The After.
Yeah.
Which is clean off its 3rd Emmy sweep at this point. Dave the Clown costumes are just like the Halloween favorite for everybody.
Yeah, okay, so that was The After. And that's something. I watched it on YouTube. I don't know how, because I couldn't find it on Amazon Prime anymore, strangely. But I found a fantastic, clear cut, you know, HD rip on YouTube. So it is on there. How did you watch it, Darren?
I may have done exactly the same thing, but may not wish to confirm it, because technically it's piracy, and I had no part in this. For anybody listening.
Of course, disclaimer.
But yeah, that would seem to be the way to procure it. It is available with a simple Google search, and that is how I watched it.
Yes, that's true, and it's worth your time. So definitely give it a look. We're going to do spotlights on all the main X-Files writers because they've all gone on, obviously, and done different shows and movies and things like that. So we're going to spotlight quite often, some of the lesser known things, some of the big things. It gives us a chance to do things like talk about Breaking Bad and stuff like that on the Xcast. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that at some point with all the different writers. So we will get more into anything else that Carter's done potentially later. Things like Harsh Realm, we'll talk about. So because we've got The Time Is Now, the Millennium podcast spin-off coming next year, probably. Yes, I am going to invite you on for that, Darren. Don't worry.
That is exactly what I was hinting.
So yeah, we're going to do Millennium like we're doing the Xcast eventually. So we'll save that for that. But yeah, the spotlights will be a semi-regular thing. Occasionally, try it tethered like this was a little bit to a specific episode that had that very strong creative hand in it. Darren will be back soon. I didn't think you were going to be back doing this until I asked you. So you may well crop up again before season 3, but we'll see. You're definitely going to be coming back on anyway. We got things in the pipeline. Yeah, you'll be back soon. So thanks again for coming on, Darren. It's been great.
It's been my pleasure.
Awesome. We'll be back soon, obviously, for another episode. Until then, you know where to find us. We're on Twitter at @the_X_cast. You can email us at thexfcast@gmail.com. We're on Facebook. We've got the Facebook page, the Xcast, and we've got the Facebook group, which has got loads of members in, lots of chatter going on. We've obviously got things like the episode tournament, which is continuing to blast on Twitter. Loads of people are getting involved. We've got all the stuff on the blog, which is now at its new home of www.blackholemedia.online, alongside all the other Black Hole Media stuff that I do, which is the podcast network we're part of. And I'm increasingly aware that this wrap-up gets longer and longer every week. So I apologise.
It's worth celebrating.
Well, maybe.
I'm just glad I'm not doing a quiz.
Well, yeah, exactly. I spared you that this time. But yeah, do check all that stuff out, guys. Because the Xcast does not begin and end with this podcast. This audio experience. There's a lot more going on in the world of the Xcast. So do check it out. Yeah, we'll be back soon for a brand new episode. But until then, remember, as always, trust no one. The Xcast is produced and presented by Tony Black, part of the Black Hole Media podcast network. Title music is courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.